Hey, how you doing, everybody? This is Michael Julian from One Vlog Podcast and One World, Episode 2, which is today's podcast on a new segment that I'm doing on my YouTube channel here on One that really focuses on the state of our planet. And in this episode, we are going to be discussing how much time we actually have left in terms of the critical circumstances and rapidly changing planet that we are on, and this little rock that we call our neighborhood, and to get down to the basis of factual information and get to the bottom of what's possible, what may or may not be truth in terms of how much time we have left, and just address it in terms of the question itself. Because so many people that I'm talking to right now here in Costa Rica and on digital media and, reaching out to folks that I know in the States right now, obviously, because there are so many intense issues happening all at once. Climate change being first and foremost, as the planet is heating up and things are becoming incredibly challenging in terms of support and resources to keep humanity going and keep us thriving and alive. To things like countries not being happy with each other right now and us witnessing deglobalization on many, many fronts, and countries not being happy with one another right now, which also poses a huge threat to humanity. So, it's not every single second that I hear this from people, but it's definitely on people's minds, and it's definitely on mine. And some days, we wake up and I'm like, did it happen today? How much time do we have left? So that's the reason I decided to go ahead and do this episode on One World. So on the podcast, I'm going to be talking about how climate change is rapidly affecting our planet and how scientists are starting to question how much longer we actually have to sustain life on this planet. I'll be exploring the scientific research and some studies on climate change and discussing what humanity will need to accomplish to increase our time as humans on the planet. Now, I realize that some of you are starting to check out One based on the main prowess of my channel, which is, positive information and things that can lift us on many, many levels, not only from a health standpoint, mind, body, spirit, and abundance, as well as talking about other cool subjects that I love to talk about. But I'm also doing this other spin with One World based on the fact that I love to hit reality, and not stay in the clouds every day about things that, are not going to provide us any information to attain mental and spiritual and emotional stability right now, I think is my motivation. So I just wanted to hit some of these points in this episode and give you some information on some research that I found in terms of some powerful scientists who have put out quite a few publications on the subject. So, in the past few decades, we've seen an increase in natural disasters that's unprecedented, obviously, such as hurricanes and floods and wildfires, which are all linked to climate change, which I already discussed somewhat in my first episode when I was talking about climate change and its effects on the world. But according to a report by the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the IPCC, which I mentioned in my first episode, if greenhouse gas emissions continue at the current rate, global temperatures are expected to rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next 2 decades. And if you had checked out the episode 1, I cover a lot of this information in that. So some of these points are going to be hit again, but really need to, let it hit home how significant that is if we're talking about that kind of rise in just 2 decades. 2 decades is a very short period of time. And this temperature rise, could result in catastrophic consequences such as the melting of the caps, sea level rise, and extreme weather conditions. So I wanted to talk about it, and come at this thing from a better than doomsdayer position on this, because of course it's a completely open-ended question, right? And that's what I'm really trying to provoke here. Some people are absolutely set on the fact that, they're going on data that and they're trusting people out there, whether they be scientific researchers or not, who are saying that, we have less than 3, 4, 5 years left. And of course, factual data provides us many, many other answers and many other details on that, which could completely dispel that theory. So that's the reason I wanted to add to the podcast here on One World and talk about what we actually know about time for us as humans on the planet, based on the fact that that could not be the case, which that would serve our mental health, would it not? Definitely serve mine. So I looked into studies that were published on many different levels, and one of them in Nature Climate Change shows that the Earth's climate is changing at a rate that's unprecedented in at least 2,000 years. Okay? So, the study shows that human activity, such as the burning of fossil fuels, obviously we have so many people in terms of overpopulation on the planet, and we've got cars everywhere, we've got industrialization everywhere, which is causing it as primary cause of the change. And the study also suggests that we need to act as fast as we can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to prevent the worst effects of climate change. That's pretty much a given. We hear that all the time, over and over and over. Question is, what are we actually really doing to achieve that? And right now, the way I see it, it looks like a lot of bullshit out there in terms of the Paris Agreement and the Green New Deal and anything that's happening in terms of worldwide government addressing the issue. There's a lot of talk. They come to the table to talk about things, but right now we're so distracted with everything else that's happening in terms of global conflict with countries and deglobalization right now. With everything that we're watching on the news, with obviously the two primary countries that are not happy with the United States, my fear, my wonder is, how much time do we really have to make a decision to actually make an impact? It's like the question resides in the question. How much time do we have to determine how much time that we have? If we're focused on these other problems, my worry is nothing's going to get done. So that's really what I wanted to address in this podcast as well. But the bottom line is, what I'm finding everywhere I look is that there's still a lot of hope. According to a report by the United Nations Environmental Program, if we take immediate action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and implement sustainable practices, we can still limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, which would be massive in terms of the prediction of the 1.5 degree increase in the next 2 decades. And that would give us a chance to adapt to the changing climate and increase our time on Earth as human beings. So that's epic. How we do that, that's really the question. To achieve this, we need to make significant changes to our daily lives. And how to go about that right now is the major challenge, right? How do we actually go about it as human beings who do not have, the powers to implement laws and resources and infrastructure and scientific implementation to actually get it achieved? How do we do that in our daily lives? Things like, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. Well, that's a little difficult if you're running a lawnmower, driving a car, go into a factory where you work. But it is something that we're going to have to figure out how to do quickly. And of course, we're seeing that all over the media, and we're seeing, how the powers that be and the scientists out there are trying to go electric and force us into that. But right now, it's not looking hopeful, based on timing and based on disagreement with global governments as to how to adopt and implement. But adopting sustainable practices and investing in renewable energy sources is the way. How to go about that? Not sure. Governments and businesses also need to play, a crucial role in it in terms of implementing the policies and initiatives to reduce carbon emissions. And that was kind of the point I already made, which is I don't see a lot of that happening right now. I just really don't, in terms of what I'm watching country to country around the world. So, I mean, climate change is a significant threat to the future of humanity on Earth. And we've got to take immediate action to slow down its effects. And it still just absolutely blows me away that there is so much infighting and arguing, and literally, can become screaming arguments between people about agreeing on the fact that it exists. I mean, I remember before I came back to Costa Rica, I was going through a challenging time and had finalized a relationship I'd been in for 27 years and wound up starting life all over again, and was living in my old neighborhood in Boxborough, Massachusetts, and trying to get my life back together. And during that time, there was a guy who lived in one of the units in the building next to me who was a private for-hire Learjet pilot. And we met, we were barbecuing one day, and he seemed pretty cool. We hung out and we exchanged, our backgrounds and our stories and stuff. And I asked him what he did, and he told me that he actually was a pilot for 3 or 4 legendary rock stars and bands for a while, which I thought was really cool. So, being a musician myself for almost 30 years, that was a topic of conversation that I found inviting. So I was just like, oh, that's really, really cool, man. Because you used to fly around, and he started to tell me, and apparently he was a primary pilot for Aerosmith for quite some time when they would need a Learjet service. So long and short of it is, we end up, kind of socially communing from time to time, and we were sharing a barbecue area out there, and I remember we were having some cocktails one night, and started talking about this subject, and I could tell he was kind of, perturbed. I don't know how he must have had a conversation with somebody perhaps on his phone or been watching something on the news, but it was on his mind, and he really had a negative attitude and stance on climate change, and really was dispelling it. It was like, it's all bullshit. It doesn't exist. And I hate it when I hear anything that's related to any of that. It's just, it doesn't exist. I know, I'm a pilot. And when it came out of his mouth, I literally was stunned. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what he had said based on the fact that the gentleman was a pilot, I would figure that flying through it on a daily basis and watching hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of acres and hectares of land on fire during the end of spring seasons and into summer across the continental United States, which is where he was flying, and drought, and the fact that even way back then, we were starting to have food scarcity around the globe, I would have thought that this would have never come out of this guy's mouth, but it did. And when it did, I made the mistake of trying to talk to him a little bit more about it and why he felt this way. And then, said, hey man, I believe that the evidence is right in front of you. Don't you see it when you're flying? And the guy flew off the handle on me. I mean, it was as if I had threatened a member of his family. It was bizarre. And it was more than a bit tense. Literally was yelling and screaming at me. Things that I will not reiterate here on this episode of the podcast. I'll save you that. Save you from that. But it just blew me away, blew my mind. And of course, that's what's got me interested and intrigued to actually focus on this subject on One World and talk about it a little bit, because, the bottom line is we are all dealing with the present circumstances, no matter what you believe, whether you are somebody like this guy who does not believe that climate change is a factor or exists at all, or whether you're aware, but you're not really aware in terms of how severe it's become. The reason I wanted to put out this information was to definitely see it from both sides of the fence, and then try to draw us together as a one community to stop the infighting and stop the arguing. What is the arguing going to what's that going to solve if humanity's time is running out based on the Earth heating to a point where it's going to be unsustainable? That's the point I'm making, which I thought was pertinent. So here we are in my podcast doing that right now, obviously. So I don't know. Whatever I can conclude about that is that obviously it's a significant threat to the future of humanity on Earth, and we've got to do something about it. So I started to look into who are the top scientists who study this particular subject, which I found really interesting, and I wanted to point anybody who's listening to this podcast right now in the direction of these scientists and some books that they've written just to provide education on the subject. And I pulled up a list, actually created a list of the authors of these books and these scientists that I really believe have the most powerful information in terms of addressing the subject of how much time we actually have left. And so in order here, I am highly promoting for anybody who is interested in obtaining more information on the subject of how much time does humanity have left on this planet. Dr. James Hansen. Dr. James Hansen is an incredible individual. He's a climate scientist and former director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies. And he's known for his research on climate change and his advocacy for action to combat its effects. He's a powerful individual who has spoken in council meetings globally all over the world about climate change. And I find his writing absolutely fascinating and incredibly informative. So I highly recommend Dr. Hansen. Number 2 on my list was Dr. Michael E. Mann. And the reason is Mann is a climatologist and director of the Earth Science Center at Pennsylvania State University. But he's known for his research on climate change and his work in developing the hockey stick graph, which for anybody studying climate change, you know, that's a very, very important theorem that he developed. The hockey stick graph is used all the time in terms of research, and it shows the Earth's temperature and its changes over the past millennium. It's very precise, and it provides a lot of data information. So Dr. Michael E. Mann, I also highly, highly recommend you check out information on him. Dr. Catherine Hayhoe is an atmospheric scientist and professor at Texas Tech University. And she's known for research on climate change and her advocacy for climate action, particularly in communicating the issues to diverse audiences. And that's the reason I really highly recommend Catherine and her books, is the fact that she's a go-getter. She goes out there and she talks to diverse cultures all around the globe about it. And I think that's really first and foremost what we need right now, you know? I mean, we're always on the hunt as human beings. We're the little people inside of our homes kind of wondering what the heck is happening and how much time we have left, and we're looking at a computer screen, and very difficult to kind of sift through all the information that scientists provide when we're hunting it ourselves on a platform like YouTube. You're definitely not going to find it in mainstream media at all, because global governments don't want us talking about it. They don't want us looking at it. They don't want us to understand how severe it is. And, you know, that we've also got the line drawn with the namesayers. You know, people just don't believe. So highly promote Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. Dr. Jennifer Francis is an atmospheric scientist and senior consultant at the Woods Hole Research Center. And she's known for her research on the link between Arctic warming and extreme weather events. Awesome information. I have read one of her books, and I really like what she does because she's focusing solely on ice, or at least most of the time. I haven't checked in on her work recently, but I think it's a great measure, is it not? I mean, if we're watching the caps, you know, melt by 50%, which I mentioned in my first episode, you know, watching ice and the polar ice caps are definitely a very valuable indicator in scientific research about how intense climate change has become. Number 5 that I listed here, Dr. Kevin Trenberth. He's a climatologist, a distinguished scholar at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, who's known for research on climate change and his work in understanding the Earth's energy budget. And that as well is excellent information, and I love the way that was poised when I looked him up, and that there is such a thing, an energy budget. What do we have in our energy budget? That is something to be learned in terms of all of us wrapping our heads around climate change and how much time we have left on the planet. Hopefully we have a lot more time. Always trying to stay optimistic here on One, obviously trying to provide positive content, and but I'm also about hitting the reality subjects that we all need to address right now that affect our daily lives. So just wanted to talk a little bit about Dr. Hansen a little bit more, just based on the fact that I'm going to put some links in the description below in terms of this podcast for you to look up his work. I really, truly believe that it's highly valuable and that provide a great resource to anybody listening to the podcast. But Dr. Hansen's a world-renowned climate scientist. He's made significant contributions in the field of climate change research. Obviously, he's known for his work in understanding the Earth's climate system and his advocacy for action to combat its effects. And has sat on global panels, trying to square away global governments to get their acts together, which I really appreciate. He's received his PhD in physics from the University of Iowa, and he began his career at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in 1967. He worked at NASA for over 40 years, and he served as the director of the Goddard Institute from 1981 to 2013. That's a pretty big credential. 40 years working for NASA. Started in 1967, and he heads the Goddard Institute. I mean, that's the brain box on this. So, he's a heavy hitter. There's no doubt about that. His research is focused on the Earth's climate system and the impact of human activities on it, which is very pertinent. What are we doing on it? What are we doing to Mother Earth? This is really the question, and this is what he studies. And in the 1980s, he was one of the first scientists to raise concerns about the potential effects of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. So here again, this is why Hansen's the man in my book. He's the very first one. And he's kept at it, and at it, and at it. And he's built an advocacy team around the world to educate global government. His research is also focused on the study of climate models, which are computer simulations used to impact or predict, or that impact and predict future climate trends. And he's been instrumental in developing and improving climate models, which have become a critical tool for understanding the Earth's climate system and pending future climate pattern. So amazing. He was the guy who knew right away, hey man, I gotta build a team of modelers. We're gonna have to constantly, consistently reinvent that modeling to keep pace, to make sure that we're, on point with the data, which is that, 5-year, decade time blocks that they give us now in terms of prediction. So, we should all be pretty thankful for Dr. Hansen's work, I'm pretty sure. Without the modeling, then we have no way to tell, so we're just kind of sitting ducks. I mean, that's not really cool. But in addition to his research, Dr. Hansen's also been a vocal advocate for action to combat climate change, and he's spoken out about the urgent need for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and has called on governments and businesses to take bold action to address the issue. And he's done this at the highest level around the world. And he is not like a lot of scientists who only show up when they're called upon, which is why I like Dr. Hansen. He's received numerous awards and honors for his work. Obviously, the guy's a genius, including the Blue Planet Prize, the World Wildfire Fund's highest honor for environmental achievement, and the Dan David Prize There's a new one to me. Didn't know about that one. It's an international award for achievements that have made an outstanding scientific, technological, cultural, and social impact on the world. Right on. And that's what we need, right? We need a positive social impact on the world to bring this information to the forefront. So I highly recommend you check out some of his works. And like I said, I'll provide some links down below. You can check out his books, I'm sure. You can resource all of his stuff on Amazon and potentially read some of those to broaden your intellectual horizons here on terms of the subject of how much time we have left on our planet. But I was also really interested in terms of what his personal views are. And it's hard, obviously he's a scientist, and that's difficult to get personal views as opposed to the scientific research. They're scientists. But what I did find were, things that kind of got to it. I mean, his personal views on how much time humans have left on Earth here are based on his research and analysis of the data by year, by 5-year, 10-year cycles, as well as minute by minute, I would imagine, based on who he is. While he's not provided a specific timeline for the future of humanity, he's definitely warning us constantly, as pretty much all of the scientists are, that if we don't take global action right now, immediately, and get on board together with this, that we're in big, big trouble in terms of how long humanity will be able to be sustainable or exist on planet Earth. I mean, he's expressed major concern about the increasing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, but primarily carbon dioxide, which is causing global temperatures to rise. And he's warned that if we don't take immediate and drastic action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that we could face catastrophic consequences such as sea level rise. We've got the bullet points again: extreme weather and widespread ecosystem collapse. But he wrote a book called Storms of My Grandchildren. And he argues that we must reduce atmospheric carbon dioxide levels by 350 parts per million, ppm, to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Currently, atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are over 415 ppm, and they're continuing to rise. So that gives you a really good insight of how much trouble we're actually in as humans on this planet in terms of answering the question as to how much time do we have left. We've got to go all the way down from 415 to 350, and it's increasing exponentially year after year. Man. So, keeping a positive mindset and trying to manifest major changes for peace on this planet and changes with our climate, that's for sure. He's also been really critical of the slow pace of action, which I love. That here again, a scientist with some balls, a scientist with a soul, a scientist with a heart, a scientist who really wants to get the word out and is talking truth in terms of how slow moving global governments are to change their ways in terms of finding solutions and in the international community. I mean, he's called for a price on carbon emissions and for the rapid development of clean energy technologies to transition away from fossil fuels, which of course is everything that we've been discussing and been talking about and been seeing on the media. And right now, of course, I'm really seeing is a bunch of stall, bunch of propositions about what could be, but no real action to implement. So his personal views on how much time humans have left on Earth are based on his scientific research predominantly, but analysis of the data. And we've got to do something about it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's no way he can really provide a specific timeline for how much time humanity has left on planet Earth. I don't think any scientist truly can. But the good news and the good on this podcast in regard to the subject is that they don't know. And right now, that's better than knowing that we have a very short amount of time, right? It really depends on what happens in the coming decade right now. And I think really what is the major factor is that we're on the precipice of global conflict in terms of world conflict between countries. And that's what's going to slow the process. So, I'm definitely hoping that we can find a way to resolve deglobalization and the tensions that are going on between the three major powers right now out there in the world. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in terms of Dr. Hanson. I think all of these books are highly, highly resourceful, very important, and definitely worth the read. No doubt. Hanson's written Storms of My Grandchildren, so bookmark that title. Was the truth about the coming climate catastrophe and our last chance to save humanity. He authored it in 2009. Other books that he's authored, that was a tongue twister. Climate Science, Awareness and Solutions in 2012. And he wrote a book called The Case for Young People in Nature, A Path to a Healthy, Prosperous, and Sustainable Future. And he wrote that in 2021. Love the titles of his books. Love the mindset. He's a positive individual, and he's trying to keep us all thriving and surviving on this planet. Let's see here. Dr. Michael E. Mann. These are his books. Note these. The Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars. Dispatches from the Front Lines. He wrote that in 2012. He also wrote a book called The Madhouse Effect, How Climate Change Denial is Threatening Our Planet, Destroying Our Politics, and Driving Us Crazy. Yeah, brother. Love you, Dr. Michael Mann. This is the little tidbit I gave you about the guy who was my neighbor, who was screaming at me in the front of our apartment complex based on the fact that I was trying to, share my opinions about the fact that I think it's real. Unbelievable. He also wrote The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back Our Planet. So Dr. Michael E. Mann, also legend and a savior saint to this planet. What a good soul in terms of where his mind is at, where his research is at, where his hard work is at, what he's trying to do to save us here. In terms of Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, she wrote A Climate for Change, Global Warming Facts and for Faith-Based Decisions. She wrote that in 2009. She wrote Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World. And I think Catherine's coming, more from a potentially religious standpoint, spiritual standpoint on these things. Also love the fact that she's doing so. Whatever your faith is, beautiful. And whatever is love for humanity. If the mindset is love for humanity and how to sustain us, how to keep us going, I'm all for it. Dr. Jennifer Francis wrote The Arctic Meltdown and Climate Change, Wild Weather, Raging Seas, and Northern Warming. She wrote that in 2019. She also wrote another book called The Polar Regions and Global Climate Change in 2020. And then we've got Dr. Kevin Trinbrith, who wrote Climate System Modeling in 1992, The Global Water Cycle, Geochemistry and Environment in 1998, and Climate Extremes and Society in 2019. And so those were a couple, Dr. Francis and Dr. Trinbrith were little additions there in terms of books that I thought you might find resourceful on the topic. But I think I've covered it in terms of where my mind was at. In terms of scientists and research and who I'm looking at, who I like right now, who's trying to help us. But I can't stress enough, the value of time right now. If you are breathing, we are living. We do have the ability to be blessed and grateful to wake up another day tomorrow. It is something for us to consider in terms of how valuable and precious our time as humans is on this planet, especially based on so many things that are so intense hitting us all at one time. So with that said, I'm sending light, love, energy, healing, and stoked energy, positive mindset to anybody out there who has been listening to this podcast. I appreciate you for tuning in. It's been a pleasure doing this podcast tonight from Costa Rica. Maybe heading back to the States here pretty soon. So if you're interested in any more content, you can let me know in the comments section below. Please comment. I would really appreciate that. Please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to build a one community, and the focus of one is to provide positive, enriching content that serves us right now in such an intense time on the planet, and helps enrich our bodies, our minds, our spirits, creates abundance, and to talk about really cool stuff that I enjoy, like art, music, mind waves, literature, and the state of our planet. So thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this is Michael Julian at One and One World. Stay safe out there. We are one. Thanks for tuning in. Till next time.